Good afternoon, and thank you for joining our webinar today. This is Yvette Kelly with the Community Technical Assistance Center, and I just want to thank everyone for taking time out of their day to join us for the last and final webinar in our Sensory Connection series. This series is being presented by Jane Musgrave and is intended to increase your understanding of sensory modulation and how a variety of sensory techniques can be used with youth, families, and staff to aid in self-regulation. We had the opportunity to hear from Jane with some very detailed content webinar, and today is the final webinar in the Power Hour mode, in which we allow time for participants to ask Jane questions directly related to any of the content that she presented or any questions that you may have. Before we get started, though, I do want to take a moment to orient everyone to the WebEx system. If you've not had the opportunity to be with us in any prior webinars, we're going to ask if you've not done so already, if you could please call into the webinar using the audio conference information found in the Events tab, which is just above the slide deck off to the left. And also, this is a webinar in which we will be utilizing the chat function. If you look over to the right of your screen, you see a chat. You click the bubble, the chat will come down and you should be able to see some welcome messages. We have not unmuted the phone, so we will be fielding questions from this chat function. So we're just going to encourage you to go ahead and begin to chat some questions in as Jane provides an overview of some of the content. Again, let me welcome Jane. Jane is an occupational therapist who has lectured and conducted a number of national trainings on exploring and utilizing sensory modulation. She was great in helping us understand how to utilize the techniques in our practice. And today, again, as I mentioned, is just an opportunity to ask Jane directly any questions that you may have regarding the material or anything you need clarity on. And so I am going to welcome and turn it over to Jane.
Thank you. I've been asked to do kind of a brief overview of what we've covered. I'm guessing, well, if you have attended any of the other workshops, you'll see some familiar slides, but I have learned through my long years of living that repetition is not necessarily a bad thing for us adult learners. So without that, please feel free to type in your questions. I do have some questions that folks sent after the last workshop last week, and so I also have some answers to those and some things that I looked up myself, because you're always educating me as well as some of the things that are out there, some of the resources, etc. So hopefully I will make that so enticing that you'll want to immediately go look them up when we finish this Power Hour. So without further ado, so we talked about what is sensory modulation and how this really is a relatively new sort of part of the interventions and services in mental health. And while I didn't talk about it last time, one of the reasons that occupational therapists are involved in this is because we have done sensory integration. And sensory modulation is kind of the next step to that, with the idea that we use this for empowering and self-soothing, but also for alerting and for being able to sort of be in the moment and take advantage of the sensory stimulus, whether it be just like this, so you're learning some new information, or you're enjoying a beautiful sunset, or any of the kinds of things in the environment and the world around us. We talked about how our nervous system is the computer and the sensory stimulus is the software. And that software comes into our bodies, and our nervous system tries to make sense of that to then produce a behavioral response, i.e., if you're very cold, you put on a jacket, i.e., if you're hungry, you eat, so that we have a behavioral response to the sensory stimulus that we have. And many of us do this instinctually all day long without even really kind of thinking about it, and it's part of our sensory lifestyle. We talked about how we are honoring the other parts of our nervous system that we don't talk a lot about in mental health. I feel like I'm the campaign kid for the brainstem and the spinal column, and how our body really is this wonderful thing that is luggage for our brain to take us places so that we can do things and interact with the environment around us and let our brain make sense of what that is. We also talked about the 7 senses and that there are more than 7. And we talked about how this helps, again, with self-regulation, but also with engagement and motivation, with improved sleep, helping with those cadences and changes within our life, those life transitions, wake to sleep. Staying at home eating breakfast to being doing a webinar for a bunch of people, or any of those kind of things where we need to change our energy level, change our focus, be the learner and sit back, or be the teacher and really present forward. And we use Cookie Monster as an example, just because he will live in the moment, which Cookie Monster tends to do, unless it's unpleasant, and then he'll eat a cookie. So he has his own sensory strategy, and our overall goal is always to help people, and people being the kids you're working with. I work with a child as young as 4, and I've worked with people up to 102 years old. I have done this within the places that I work, with the staff that I've supervised, or the programs I've run, as well as in my own life, and even with my own husband. Okay, so we talked about, can you name the senses? And we did that. We went over the 5 heavy hitters that we always think about, that we learn about in school. Then we went over the 2 that you learned about if you were in OT school, which are proprioception and vestibular, and really the 8th sense, which is interoception. And what that is our ability to feel our own internal organs. When I first started doing this, I didn't talk a lot about that because I really didn't understand it as part of sort of the sensory system. But the more I worked with kids, particularly kids who are on the spectrum, I was finding that they would not recognize even the need of, gee, I got to go to the bathroom, or gee, I'm full, I've eaten enough, I don't need to continue eating, I should stop. And having that ability to how you can either help sort of integrate that knowledge to them, use some life skills around that, and what are some other sort of techniques that, is medication affecting this, and those kind of things that actually can interfere with our ability to really feel within our own bodies. And we talked about the one thing that I told you, if we had an exam, this would be on the exam. I'm actually going to be giving an exam in 2 weeks, and this will be on the exam, is the just right balance. And that is when the person is both calm and alert. And that is really the place where self-awareness happens and where learning takes place, because the person's content, relaxed, they're engaged, and you can feel that they're present. They're present with you in the room, in the interactions, the dynamics that are going on within the sensory environment. Again, my hope is that all of you right now are in the just right balance. If not, or if you're working with somebody and you do need to do teaching with them or training, you have to remember, I want to get that person to the just right balance, and then I really, as they say, stack the deck in your favor and stack the deck in their favor, because you put them at a place where they can then take advantage of all those wonderful cognitive skills they have, because they are calm and alert. And we talked about the different arousal states. There's high arousal, low arousal, there's too high, too low, and there's balanced. Calming things have in common, one of my favorite quotes, they're mild, they're soft, they're predictable, and the alerting things are strong and pronounced, they're new. We talked about what some basic sensory approaches are, and here are some ideas for calming. And we talked about the idea of grounding and how that's different, that alerting can be just as, in some ways, calming, because you're feeling present, you're in your own body, you feel like you have control, you're focused and you're grounded. We talked about the 2 thresholds, and you guys actually who were here last week thought about, gee, am I a low threshold kind of person, or am I a high threshold kind of person? With the low meaning you have a really low tolerance to stimulus, and things can, the littlest things can kind of make you jump, or the little tag in your clothes, or the itch, or actually, where were we? We were at a football game yesterday with the Patriots and the New York, oh my gosh, I'm so bad at football. I want to say, is it the Jets or the Giants? And what happened was there was a fan going overhead, and there were some people who had low tolerance, and they couldn't tolerate the fact that we had the fan in the room and we had to turn it off. An example of low tolerance. High tolerance. I need a lot more. I need a lot of intense sensory stimulus to be able to stay focused and grounded. Those are your fidgeters, your pencil chewers, your whistlers, the people who talk with their hands a lot, and all those kinds of things. And so, again, we talked about low and high thresholds. And then we talked about Dunn's model of sensory processing, and that there are 4 quadrants that people fall into, whether they be low or high. And people actually talked and sort of thought about that. We used this nice picture as an example of who's a seeker, who's a sensor, who's a bystander, and an avoider, the avoider being up in the apartment hiding away from this busy street with everything going on. And we talked to them again about what is self-regulation. And self-regulation is, so what do you do about that? If your sensory system falls in these categories, and all of ours do, to either extent that we are most like other people, or we may be more than most people or less than most people, but we all fall within these quadrants. What are our behavioral responses if we're finding that that sensory stimulus is intolerable or is dysregulating to us? All right, we talked about some evals, and I highly recommend, particularly if you have an OT available to you, your OT now, if they're a new grad or graduated more recently, have learned these things in school. If they're a little bit more seasoned, such as myself, it's something that we have learned after our graduate work, but people are, their OTs are much more, as I say, interrelated or reliability competent in these areas because it's part of the curriculum now, but there are cover from birth to 14 for the child and from 11 to adults. For the adolescent sensory profile, I highly recommend those. Again, this is just a slide that kind of goes over what happens with these evals, that recommendations come out of them, that allow us to be more prescriptive in we should try this, try that, see if that works for you. People who fall within these categories tend to find these interventions helpful. Again, I'm not saying that it's absolutely you have to do all of them, but often I'll say to a parent and a child, okay, pick out 3 you really want to work with, that you really want to focus in on, and see if you can do them 3 times every day to help build your own sensory lifestyle. And then we talked about one of my favorites, and not just mine, but lots of people request this, and that is weight and the role of weight, why weight works. I find a lot of people will go, yeah, it's calming. And I go, well, it's calming because there's a absolutely neurological reason why this is happening to you. This is not a frontal cortex thing. It is really your body working for you to help you gain to that place that you can be either in that just right balance or in that place where you're calm so you can go to bed. So use your body to work for you, not against you. And that's because when we apply weight, our muscles literally send a signal to our spinal column, and our spinal column sends a signal back on C fibers, which tell our muscles not to contract. And we feel that as relaxation. So we talked about different kind of weight things that are out there. I introduced to you Enid, the weighted bear, and told a little story about her and the fact that I gave you some directions on how to make a weighted animal. So if you want, you can certainly go on the web page and find those. And then the only thing that I ask everyone is to name your weighted animal. Don't leave these poor, newly developed weighted animals nameless. They take on their own personalities. And I find with the kids, this is really part of kind of a transition when we complete the exercise. I have found these to be one of the most valuable tools, particularly when working with younger children, but that doesn't mean that older people and adults don't also thoroughly enjoy them. We talked about how Enid now has her own article. I think I even told you that we went out to dinner and celebrated Enid. And then we really provided some sort of sensory opportunities that you can build into your facilities, into your curriculum, into the culture, on the milieu of your organization. And let's see, I don't have a slide for that one. And now I don't have any slides, so that's interesting. Okay, so we will go back. And having gotten to there, I will just quickly ask Morgan for technical assistance. Morgan, I have no slides showing, so I'm wondering if that seems to be a bit of a problem, but it doesn't mean that we can't continue to talk. All right, I'm just going to do a quick check to see if I have any, and I seem to have none.
Hi, Jane. We can see that. Hi, Jane. This is Morgan. We can see you advancing the slides.
Okay.
The slides are moving, but do you have a printout of the slides that you could follow? And then, so
yep,
why don't you? I'm going to take us back to the picture of Enid, and hang on one second. So I've got the picture of the spool of thread and the popcorn.
Okay.
So you can just say next slide and I'll advance you. Okay.
Perfect.
And then they're seeing the slides. Okay.
Okay.
Let me just ask the people on the phone to chat into the chat box if you can see the slides. I want to make sure our participants can see the slides. So if someone wants to let us know if they can see the slides, that would be great. Or if you can't. This is a good test to see who knows how to use the chat box.
This is a good test. This will be a very good test of me and my imagination that I can visualize. All right. Actually, if we could go to the slide, which I believe will be 1, 2, 3, 4 ahead, which is called activity.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That would be great. Okay. All right. Sounds good. Activity. So next slide. We talked about the role of pattern repetitive movement, and we talked about how our brains, if we are upset, and I saw a wonderful example of this yesterday as I was listening, I guess the new Peanuts movie that's coming out, and there is a sort of traditional thing in Peanuts movies when an adult is talking, it goes wah, 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 wah. Well, when we're upset and someone is trying to use a verbal sort of persuasive a technique to calm us down, we tend to hear wah, 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 wah. We're not really be able to focus because our frontal cortex is not functioning in its optimum bit. We're really back to more of our lizard brain, as I say, and engaging in a pattern repetitive movement helps us really open those neural pathways up to allow our frontal cortex to function for us. Next slide. So again, pattern repetitive rhythmic movement really not only elicits a safety feeling within us, but it helps us with regulation. Then next slide. We gave some examples of this, and here are some examples that people find that pattern repetitive movement and activities that you can put into your program. Next slide. And then we looked at, yes?
I just want to make sure we're on the right slide. Are you on slide 35?
I'm on the slide that has the little trampoline in the bottom.
There we go. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. All right. And we won't be doing the slides too much longer, so this will be better. And again, this is where I challenged you last time to think, do you have these kind of activities in your program? How could you bring them into your program? I'm actually even working with parents on bringing some of these things into the kids' home and into the kids' sort of daily life. So I'm even making recommendations for things like, you know, kayaking or trying to think the recommendation I made the other day was for sort of parallel activities that include repetitive movement versus cooperative group activities. Next slide, which should say sensory tools, correct?
Correct. We are all set.
Perfect. Okay. So next slide after that. So then we gave some examples of some things that we can do, some things that you can actually just do within your programs, some sort of interventions, some craft projects, some tools that kids could make. And I really emphasized the idea that when kids are part of the process, or adults, in making these tools for themselves, they take on a certain value. They take on what I call purposeful activity, and they tend to be the things that people are very careful with and use appropriately. And as I say, I've never seen a weighted animal used in an inappropriate manner than for a calming and coping tool. Next slide, please. Again, we talked briefly about using hand massages and wrist balms and the different lotions that are out there. I gave you some techniques for that. And next slide. And then we talked about breathing exercises and really giving people visuals for how you want to see their breath moving. And the idea at the top is the yes, and that's the curved edges that people should have with their inhalations to their exhaling to inhaling versus a sharp, spiky, fast breathing. And then we can go over these next ones quickly. We talked about, next slide, fidget tools, and we gave some directions and uses for that. The next one, next slide, was homemade Play-Doh that you can add aroma to, and there was the cooked version. There are some non-cooked versions online because people don't always have access to a stovetop. The next one was a scented rice sock. And then the following one from that was the water bottle wave. Now, I actually would love to hear if for people anyone who is with us last time, did people see the YouTube video on the Just Breathe? So if you did, please type in and tell me if you liked it, you think it would be helpful. I sort of have a secret goal that I want every child and adult on the planet to be able to have access and see that video. Next slide. Then we talked about enhancing our environments. Next slide. We talked about some tools that people can do in their staff room, and then the next slides we can just quickly go through. They are just pictures of things that are being brought into sensory rooms and comfort rooms. There's a chair, there's rainbow in my room, and we continue on to the next slides. There's moon in my room. The slides after that are the scented electric candles, which are wonderful. They have colors and they even have a vanilla scent to them. This page after that, which is kind of a blueprint of what a sensory room could look like. Really fun to sit down with graph paper and kind of design these with a committee that you might have on building a sensory room or a comfort room. Next slide. We just showed some sort of samples of what could be in a sensory room. Following slide as well. And the slide after that. And then we ended really with what is a sensory diet. And talked a little bit about that, gave some examples on this. So what's a sensory diet? The next slide, how to develop a sensory diet. A little bit, the following slide, of a timetable. And then we gave an example of a sensory diet. And then we ended with keep calm and use your common sense and keep calm and call your occupational therapist. So are we on the right slide?
We are. We're all set.
Wonderful. Not bad for... for not seeing what's going on. Okay, so now I'm assuming we have the couple of slides after this that I just sent you when we get to a specific question about environments.
Yes, we do.
Because I'm not going to be able to see those, and those I did not print out. So I might have to just use my imagination and creativity a little bit as we talk about some of those. All right. So do we have any questions already that people have typed in?
There are not any questions that are currently in the chat box. Again, if you want to take a moment to answer a couple of the other questions that we got sent to us, that'd be great. Thank you.
I'd be glad to. Okay. I got a list of questions. Some are actually almost workshops in amongst themselves. So those I'm going to give sort of a brief answer to and then actually give you some resources to go for further information. And some are some sort of quick ones that I can kind of start off with. So one of the ones that I wanted to, just sort of a quick one, was people have asked me, how do you get sensory tools? And are any of these sensory tools payable through various insurance plans? I have found that I have done quite well on getting tools for kids through either having a line item sensory budget, which is one way, and I've done that through a hospital kind of environment. And then in my community work, I have found that in Massachusetts, I think I mentioned before that Massachusetts, certain community children's programs, this one's called Caring Together, actually have required a certain amount of OT consultation hours. So within that, there was rolled into their budget some flexibility for buying supplies for like a weighted blanket or a weighted tool, et cetera. Anything that you can create yourself does make things, quite honestly, more fiscally available. So I say to people, save your money for some of the big ticket items and for some of the smaller ones that you can create, such as the weighted animals, those glitter bottles, the putty, the therapy dough, and all that kind of things. See, another thing that I have not tested out yet, and that's because a lot of times, even though OTs are third-party billable, I haven't tried through Medicare, Medicaid to find out if you can write a prescription for some of these things, or if a doctor were to write a prescription. If anyone knows a little bit more information about that, please type in and let me know. I do know that what I will say in my recommendations when I do evaluations is I strongly recommend, or the OT has recommended, you know, weighted blanket, say pressure vest, those kinds of things. And we usually are able to find some kind of funding source for that. And again, the other thing I do is I am a seeker of donations, and I've had a temple next door to my home. I came home and found 45 weighted animals having been made, which was part of a youth project that the temple did. So you can be creative in ways that you can actually obtain these tools. Let's see, another question that was asked, one asked where they can get some assessment tools to use with children or adolescents in the emergency room. A couple of things. I strongly advocate to have a basket of sensory tools, maybe in that admission suite or in that enrollment suite, say if it's a school sort of program versus a hospital program or a intensive residential care program. So maybe have a weighted blanket available, have a weighted animal in the area, have some stress balls, have some squish toys. I did talk to one nurse who does admissions, and she said, there's absolutely no way I want any of those things in my room. It could be terribly dangerous. I always challenge that just a little. Again, I am not the nurse. I am not doing that initial admission assessment, so I'm certainly not going to make any staff people feel uncomfortable. But in my experience of doing this, I have not seen these things used inappropriately or as weapons. The other thing about a weighted blanket, if you throw a weighted blanket, it basically just kind of goes bloop onto the floor. There isn't necessarily anything that can be terribly aggressive about that, just given its softness and its weight. It's kind of like throwing a quilt on the floor. So clearly, I don't want people to forget the idea of using common sense, but some of these tools have been extremely effective in the emergency rooms where I've done consultation too. The thing about these tools is they sell themselves best. You can have me say anything you want, and you don't necessarily always believe it until you see it in practice. And once you see a tool actually help calm somebody before you, or once you see that, gee, that intervention allowed that person to be able to participate more in the initial, the verbal part of the initial assessment, that's what sells it, not so much me. So slowly bringing things in and letting staff test them out themselves can be very effective. That leads nicely to the next question, which was, how do you integrate this into aspects of the therapeutic milieu? That's actually one of our more longer-winded sort of answers, but I even took some little notes for myself on this one. The first thing is that when I do training, I always make sure that I add some experiential components to it so that people can really feel this for themselves. This is a new medium for me, webinar training, where I can't hand you out tools, or you can't come up to the front of the room and look at all the fun stuff I've got on the table and kind of test things out. But that, again, this is an experiential medium, and so it is an experiential sort of training. Because once you go, wow, that was really nice, or that felt good, then you can understand, and you can even share kind of your experience with some of the tools with the individual that you're working with, whether they be 7 years old or 70 years old. So the first thing that I recommend to bring this concept into your organization, your facility, your school, your hospital, even into the parents in the homes, is to train everybody. I say train all of your staff, train all new staff coming in. Start maybe, I do a lot of work when I consult nationally in doing a train-the-trainer model. So I'll get folks together at a residence or school, hospital, and they will be what we call the champions, and they will be the people who are going to learn the training and then start rolling it out. A lot of people will say, I must have our sensory room up and running completely, or I must have all the equipment before I start the training. I think these things kind of work almost in parallel. As you start your training, people experience a little, you start building, people go, that worked, I want more, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you just wait till you have everything, then this stuff is sort of sitting around not being used or gathering dust, or people don't understand it. So really try and parallel your acquisition of the items along with the training. Another recommendation I have is, now you're training your staff, and if you have any clients, if your clients are there, sort of more on what we call either a continuum or a longer term length of stay, if you can have some that have used this successfully, can they also be part of the training for your staff? So I had a wonderful young man who would come when I was training all new staff at the hospital, and he'd share some of his stories, very powerful stories about how these techniques and these tools had helped him in self-regulating. Add sensory groups to your programs. Make it part of the culture. So maybe take that crafts group or take that relaxation group or whatever it may be, and instead of having to add another group where staff are going to go, oh, I can't do all this, what you do is you're kind of just metamorphosizing your current program to really roll this in. This rolls in beautifully in DBT groups, in cognitive behavioral therapy groups, in relaxation groups. Yoga is actually part of this modality, so you may be doing some of these, but reframe it as part of the sensory modulation program so that you're providing the education of this along with the actual experience of it. So again, I mentioned Karen Moore's book in the references that I handed out. She has a wonderful sort of, I can't even think of how many there are. There must be about, I'm just looking at the book right now, over 40 different kinds of groups that you could actually be running called sensibility groups, or the learning your senses, you and your senses kinds of groups. And when I have to go to a hospital where I consult and I'll walk in the door and they'll go, oh, gee, would you do a group? I'll just kind of pick one of these out of my head instead of going, oh, my goodness, what in gosh name am I going to do? So it gives you kind of that backlog of experience that you can pull from and a wonderful reference. The other thing, and this is a long-winded answer and I apologize, but I think it's an important one. The other thing is I highly recommend, if you want to bring this kind of program into your facility, is you look at starting a sensory committee. That could be staff, part of your champions that were going to be your train the trainer model if you do that. I also recommend if you have any clients, and that could be, again, kids, adults who are interested in this and want to be part of that, that kind of supports that whole peer mentoring piece, and look at how we're going to find space to do this. How are we going to work with leadership in terms of helping us to fund some of these things? I find that the committee is a great forum for doing this because you keep minutes. I always say present your minutes to leadership so that they see set goals that you want to work on. And when I consult, this is exactly what I do with groups. I come in and I go,
Hi, Yvette, can you hear me? Hi, this is Morgan. I'm wondering if anyone on the webinar is able to...
It's actually part of, I think, part of the reason that we were acknowledged by SAMHSA is that we started looking at not just the restraints that happen. Because remember, we brought this in originally because it was about restraint seclusion reduction. So we decided if we were just going to say, oh, look at how much less restraints we have. Well, it was sort of, are we having some problem with audio right now?
Yeah, Jane, this is Yvette. I apologize. We are having some technical difficulties. Both Morgan and I got kicked off the line. So if anyone else, but we're back. I'm back on now. So if anyone else is having difficulty with the audio, please chat in. And
do we know if anyone heard what I was just saying or no?
I don't know. I don't think so. Actually, they lost you, but they could hear me for part of the time. So I think we're back in business again. And somebody just texted in that, that it was gone, but now it's back on. So,
okay.
Okay. Hopefully we're good. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. I just don't know where I left off. So if there was a way to find out kind of where we left off, that would be helpful for me.
Okay, I did not advance the slide to your second set of slides, so.
No, that's okay.
It was really just a short time ago, so I think you can pick up right wherever you are now. Don't worry about what you missed. It was really just a second ago.
Awesome, thank you. Okay. So what I was saying is that there was a way that you can track the successes. That's a data collection that you can do. And that's the idea of let's look at them. We call them near misses. You could call them successes, times that somebody was becoming dysregulated and you used a tool and it did not result in a restraint or it did not result in aggressive behavior. And starting to track the successes is extremely powerful. I think that a lot of times we are problem-oriented. And so we're always kind of looking to solve the problems and then not let that happen again, but not doing it from, oh, this is a success, let's recreate that. Let's really kind of, support that and see how many times we are succeeding. So a long-winded answer. It is a process to bring this in, excuse me, but it is a process that is well worth it. It takes time. I think of it as a garden. That's the kind of analogy I use, that you have to sometimes dig in the dirt first, plant the seeds, wait, water, and weed before you have the end product that you want. Okay, so that was a long-winded answer, and I'm sorry if we lost some folks in the middle there. Let's see, other questions? So no questions typed in yet, correct?
That's correct. There's no questions.
Okay. A couple of other questions that came up was, let me see, where are we? Another thing that came up was this idea of, how do you organize it? And I guess I would recommend that people look at or look on the web for the 6 core principles of restraint, seclusion, reduction. It's actually called the 6 core strategies, sorry, to reduce the use of seclusion and restraint. And if you log in 6 core strategies, it will come up. It's a wonderful sort of paper that was used by the National Technical Institute Center through SAMHSA. And in it are the ideas of using data, which we just talked about a little bit in terms of tracking your successes. But there's also the strategy of using tools, and that is a strategy 4, and that is where all of this stuff really kind of, I guess, became official to or gave birth to. So strategy 4, utilizing tools that help with reducing, if not eliminating, or what I like to say, preventing restraint, and then how you can, again, integrate that into your whole program. So that's one reference that I would strongly encourage you to look up. Another reference, another question that came up was the question on bullying. So I would recommend, in terms of bullying, this is interesting. I'm working with a young man right now who has certainly some bullying behavior. And what we're finding is that when he is overwhelmed, he is definitely a sensory avoider, and we talked about that, and he becomes quite dysregulated in large groups of people with lots of stimulus going on, and that's when he tends to really engage more in some of the bullying behavior. So really looking at how can we, during this time, the age he is right now, be more sensitized to the types of environment and really provide him with some opportunities to self-regulate before this, having some opportunities to be able to remove himself from some of these environments. Like one example was he's fine in church. It's kind of calm and quiet. It's the after church events when everyone's outside running around and there's, food and drinks and people talking, et cetera. That tends to be more dysregulating for him. and how mom can now recognize this and kind of understand this and be able, and not necessarily say, okay, so we're going to go to the church event and then we're going to go to your baseball game and then we're going to do this, and giving him all these different sort of overload of sensory stimulus in one fell shot. How can she balance this out? And we do find that when he is in less sensory stimulus environments, we're not seeing that same kind of behavior. So therefore, we even talked about, is baseball and baseball team the best thing for him? Would what I call the parallel sports be a better idea? And we've got him engaged in horseback riding, and that has been wonderful. He's really competing against himself, not competing against the other kids, because it's, again, that parallel, not cooperative kind of activity. And we are seeing then less bullying, particularly when he's in those environments. The other recommendation about preventing of bullying, and of course, bullying literature is usually about, who the bully is and then who the victims are. But on the American Occupational Therapy website, which is called AOTA.org, as a link, there is a bullying prevention and friendship promotion handout with, again, additional links, including an Eyes on Bullying toolkit. What can you do? Great resources, great references. I highly recommend them. Again, the whole bullying topic is a little bit large for, just our time frame here. It's, again, another whole workshop. But really looking at, are there certain sensory stimuluses going on when the child is engaging in the bullying behavior? And that's, again, taking that sensory modulation approach. It can also be behavioral. I'm not saying all of these things are just sensory. Clearly they're not. But at least weeding out what maybe the sensory stimuluses are, or learning to recognize some of the triggers, can be helpful. So I recommend those as resources for you. Okay, other questions? Let me see. We talked about that, which is techniques and tools in the emergency room. Somebody asked for additional examples of modulation exercises they can share with clients, or links to provide resources. One link for that I highly recommend is another web page, which is called otinnovations.com, and it's innovations.com. This is a web page written by Tina Champlain, who has done a lot of research in this sensory modulation, has written a book about it, as well as done her dissertation work on the effectiveness of the weighted blanket, which is some more resources that are actually very cool that are out there. But what she does is, in this webpage that I just referenced, she has a nice list of lots of the different modalities and different activities that you can do, as well as the use of space. And now what I'm going to try and do, although it's going to be a little tricky for me because I'm not going to be able to see the page. So Yvette, I might ask you to describe the page just quickly to me as it comes up, and then I can talk a little bit about it. I'd like to show some examples of what we did in terms of converting space. And how that works is, let me just, I was going to see if I could possibly pull it up on my laptop. I don't think I can do that right now. Creating a sensory room versus a comfort room. And I'm assuming the first slide that we're showing here says comfort room?
It does, yes.
Okay, perfect. So what a comfort room is a comfort room is something that is available at all times. So that it is usually, if you're in a residential or a hospital setting, it is actually in the actual wing or the unit, whatever word dorm that you're using to describe the space, so that people can use it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year. And it isn't time that, only certain, the comfort room's only from 10 to 2, and you have to sign up long in advance. It's usually not a huge space. Sometimes it is a converted storage area. Sometimes it is actually a room. I understand that space is real estate, and real estate is prime, sort of golden property that everyone's kind of looking for. No one feels like they have too much space in their programs. But it has things that you would not be concerned from a safety standpoint in allowing the children, the adults in your program to have access to. And that it's supposed to be inviting and comfortable and delightful. The one that we just finished building in a hospital that I'm consulting to doesn't feel like the hospital. When you go in that room, a client told me the other day, you can kind of forget that you're in the hospital and you can just sort of take in the calmness of the environment around you. Next slide. A sensory room, which I believe is the next slide, is all the things that a comfort room is. But it's also, in addition to that, it is this idea of you have other tools that you might want to use for alerting. So a sensory or calming room, a comfort room is for calming, a sensory room is for calming and alerting. And that's when you really have some of your more skilled staff, more trained staff. And again, it does not have to be an occupational therapist. It can be anyone that you kind of choose, or one of your champions that wants to take this on and work with this modality. And you might want to start a group. Say, we did a bedtime transition group. And the nice thing about that group, we started with sort of the lights on, and we even started with a little bit of music, and we would slow it down. So we'd turn the lights down a little bit, the music would change to something slower, we'd do some deep breathing, we'd hand out, say, scented lavender or chamomile, and people would do a hand massage. We'd end with some deep breathing, and then the kids would go to bed. So it was really helping with those transitions, those life transitions we talked about before, and utilizing the room as a tool. I believe the next couple of slides are some examples of sensory rooms and comfort rooms, and if I can pull it up myself in any way, shape, or form, I'm going to be slightly more effective in describing these to you. But let's see if I can do any of that quickly here. This is called winging it without the picture. I think I can do this, though. I think I can pull this off.
Yeah, Jane, if it's helpful, the first picture has like a blue chair with a mural in the background.
That's very helpful. Thank you so much. Okay, so the first one I'm showing you here is a sensory room. And a sensory room is, I've actually been able to pull it up. This is perfect. Okay, so the sensory room, this is the sensory room we designed at the hospital I worked at where I was a director. And you can see we have a mural on the back wall. We have this huge, big, comfy rocking chair. And this was a hospital that did have adolescents, but primarily we had adults. We had one adolescent unit and about 10 adult units. You can see there's actually a waterfall on the side of the mural, and we had lights so that when we turn the lights in the room down, the water and the lights would kind of look like the waterfall was coming down. Next slide. Here's another corner of that room. We had a bubble machine in there. We had the chair pad that was a massage. Again, this was just an ordinary group. It's actually a two-staff-person office that we converted into a sensory room. And it was in part of what we call a treatment mall. So there was a kitchen next door. There was a craft rooms down the hall. We added some things about mindfulness. We did cover the windows, and that allowed us to change the lighting, have a little bit more control of that. Some ways that you can do that is actually with a dimmer switch for the main lighting overhead, or adding additional lighting as we did. Next slide. We also had some of the what I call Nintendo chairs or gaming chairs. Kids tend to like to be more on the floor. Adults tend to like to be higher up. So we kind of had a variation of seating. And then the next slide just shows you that a change in the lighting can really change the feel of the room. So that would be a sensory room, and sensory because it's got the instruments, it's got a Febreze machine, it's got a stereo system, it's got all these kind of things. That room, you did have staff with you when you were in the room, and we conducted groups in there and individual sessions. The next slide is the comfort room slide. And for those of you who haven't seen me, that's actually me. So this was a room that we had in a hospital. Again, you can do this in lots of different places. I'm working now at a residential program, a residential school, and they're looking at adding these into the dorms. Having rocking chairs, glider chairs. Next to my foot is a beanbag chair you can't quite see. We have some more of those gaming chairs on the floor. The stickers in the back are called Wallies. They're a wonderful way of creating a different kind of feeling to the room. They have big ones, they have small ones. Target has them, IKEA has them. You can go to wallies.com and you can get large ones, which are even sort of the equivalent of, you know, a beautiful garden gateway or looking out a huge window onto the ocean or to your English country garden. Next slide. And again, just an example of how you can just set it up. It does not need to be complicated, but it just has to feel inviting. Again, remember, you're the Martha Stewart of mental health here. You're trying to make this, when I stand on that threshold, there's something about this space that makes me want to engage in it. Next slide. We found artists that we didn't know we had among us. And so in another room on a different unit, we actually created murals, and these were actually painted on the wall. And again, you could use the paper that is that 3M paper and create a painting that way, so it can go up on the wall. So if you're worried, because some people say they rent the space, they don't own the space, they can't paint on the wall. There's lots of things that you can do. Don't let the don'ts, don't paint on the wall, don't do this, don't do that, limit your creativity. There are creative ways that you can still create these environments given the restrictions that you might have based on the physical environment. The next slide is actually Tufts New England Medical Center, and that's a place that I just consulted, and they have allowed me to show these slides. These are, this was a patient room that was converted to a comfort room. Very simple. We were able to just add, again, the softer lighting, some pictures, a table and chair. A lot of people will add table and chair to their space so that people can do some of the paper pencil kind of tasks, which are the new calming drawing coloring books we talked about last time that I'm finding everywhere. Grocery stores, CVS, you name it. It's hit mainstream. The next example is example of a little bit more of that room and the occupational therapist who runs that program. So, and again, what do you do with an ugly radiator? We put a pretty sticker on the front of it, and we made it a chalkboard so you can draw. Put a chalkboard of this this 3M kind of paper, and people can write sayings, they can do drawings, so you can allow the folks that are receiving services at your facility to be part of the creation of the room. Ellen there is sitting in a nice rocking chair. Again, we added the stickers, and she had a beautiful big beanbag chair, including the squishy pillows and those kinds of things. The next picture is an example of unused space. And I love this one because we had the unused space committee, or I would call it abandoned places, neglected spaces into comfortable spaces. And these were porches that we had off of each of the dorms at a facility, and they were used for storage. People were just throwing the junk out there that they didn't know what to do with. So we worked with housekeeping. The head of housekeeping became part of our comfort committee, our sensory committee, and she organized additional storage for these things that were going kind of out on the porch. We worked with the safety director, who originally thought the porches weren't safe, and we fixed up all the things that they wanted fixed up. And then what we were able to do is take this unused space, and for $225, next slide, we created a comfortable place. So again, this was a space now that people would go out even if they were confined to the unit. Sometimes people will find that they are on a restriction, either when they're first admitted or due to their clinical status, that they can't leave the unit. This was a nice place of utilizing these off the unit porches. So I would do evaluations out there. I'd run sensory group out there. We had the rocking chairs. Families could meet with their other family members, and family visits could be happening out there. So again, look at your abandoned, neglected spaces and be creative. There's huge potential and opportunity. And just because, and I guess this is what it's called being in recovery from state service. So just because somebody says no the first time, it's amazing how I would sort of bring ideas up again over time, And sometimes, leadership changed, different views came in, different cultures changed within the facilities, and I knew I succeeded when someone would come to me and go from leadership, that porch, maybe we should do something about it. And I go, what a fabulous idea. I'm all about getting it done. It doesn't matter who gets the credit for it. It's the idea that it happens and it gets done and it gets used. All right, we have about 3 more minutes. So are there any other thoughts or questions that we want to go over?
There are none coming in, so if that's the case, I just want to take this opportunity before we close out the webinar to thank you for sharing your expertise in sensory modulation. Also want to have your contact information up in case folks have some questions after the webinar is closed and they would like to email either you or us. That would be helpful. And we will also be posting this webinar along with the other webinars in the series on our website. So if you have staff who were not able to join us today, you could direct them to the website and they will be able to view this. Other than that, any last minute words or comments?
No, but just really, if this is something that you would like to bring into your facilities, again, remember that it is not something you do and walk away from. It is like a garden. And in the beginning, there's a lot of work, just like when you're planting all those tulip bulbs in the fall, and then all of a sudden in the spring, everything starts growing and looking wonderful. The nicest thing about this, and I realize I'm using a lot of movie references here, but, you know, build it and it will come. So don't just wait. Don't sort of say, oh, we can't do that because we don't have this, we can't do that. Start your training even if you don't have all your equipment. Look at gathering equipment if you don't have all your staff trained. Really try and work in sort of simultaneously and open this up to anybody who really would like to engage in it in terms of being part of the planning. If there's some kids at your facilities that are receiving services, they want to be part of it, that's fabulous. You might want to bring in the director of dietary or the director of housekeeping or even the safety officer, even the human rights officer, any of those other people that we don't normally think of when we're designing new therapeutic programs as kind of being part of the mix. I was absolutely blown away by how helpful housekeeping was when I was doing this. And she would find things that had been tucked away in closets and go, do you think you could do this? And I go, that would be great. So take advantage of the wonderful creativity of our human nature and be the Martha Stewarts of mental health. And I think that's it.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us. And just want to remind you, we have put up a number of resources for that Jane mentioned in the presentation. And again, this webinar will be posted. And thank you. Have a good afternoon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.